Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Whither the Looniversity, the podcast of the Peerless Review. I'm Adam Elwanger, and I'm happy to have my friend on as a guest today. His name is Dr. Harry Crane. He's a full professor of statistics at Rutgers University, and he's also co-founder, along with Ryan Martin of University of North Carolina, of the platform Researchers.One. You can find it online at Researchers.One, O-N-E. It's an online publication or a platform that allows for scholarly publishing, community building, and research collaboration. Harry, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I'll start by, you're the first statistician that we have had on so far. I'm trying to talk to people in as many different disciplines as I can. Tell us about your training. How'd you choose statistics? What does your research focus on in terms of statistics? These sorts of things.
Yeah, so my interest, I guess, growing up, I was always good at math. I always liked math, and kind of just continued to do it throughout college. Actually, in college, my favorite subject was actuarial science, which was mostly using probability, not on the probability side, not on the statistics side of things. And so at some point, I decided to go to graduate school, though it wasn't what I originally wanted to do coming out of college. And I wanted to continue to study probability. And for me, probability was associated to statistics, even though there's some kind of, usually a lot of people go into math, but I accidentally went into statistics. And that's kind of, here I am, I guess. So it really wasn't anything that I even, you might even say I didn't even consciously think it, wasn't even really consciously choosing it. It was just something that I always did and I always enjoyed.
Okay. And so do you still work with your research still focuses on probability issues, or has it shifted since you've been a professor?
I think, yeah, it's still mostly in probability. It's become maybe more in the range, in the realm of applied probability, but what I was studying was probability theory, stochastic processes, and it was on the kind of the more abstract or mathematical side of statistics, for those who can kind of tell the difference. Yeah.
So in particular, when you talk about sort of applied statistics, one of the areas of interest for you is sports betting, right?
Somewhat, although I wouldn't say that that's where my research.
That's not where your research.
That's not really where my research is. Although there's actually a lot of interesting things that come of that. What I like about that is, and this kind of ties into some things that I think we'll talk about that are not directly statistically related, but one of the things that I really I think is not only interesting and fascinating, but really important, is to tie what I do and how I think about things to the real world. And one of the really, if you want to get into it, the fact that statistics is so widely used throughout science is, makes it a pretty important field and has a lot of impact. But so it does have a lot of impact on the real world, and therefore a lot of mistakes or misunderstandings of how to use it have bad impact potentially on the real world. And so by going into the realm of risk and talking specifically about betting, actually gambling more generally, but I do talk a little bit about sports betting elsewhere. What's interesting there is that you can't lie about it. If you're lying about it, you're lying to yourself, because the money's coming out of your pocket ultimately. And it's really something that teaches things that I would never have learned, that I haven't learned in 10 plus years of statistical research in academia, because you don't get that feedback mechanism of, there's the reality test doesn't actually exist in pretty much any field of science. Because you don't have, there isn't necessarily a clear criteria of what the objective is, right? There's a statistical test that gets run, it crosses a threshold and you say there's evidence for something, but in betting, you're either making money or you're not.
That's fascinating. There was one course in college that I got an F in. It was business statistics.
Yeah.
That's not wholly because of my innumeracy, but partly because of it.
Well, to tell you the truth, I mean, so my lowest grade in college was statistics.
Really?
And like I said, I liked probability. I actually did not like statistics, but not only that, but my lowest grade was in statistics. And I can, I guess, look back on it now and blame other people. I'm not trying to blame other people, but really, I think the way in which statistics is taught it does injustice to the subject, but it also made it, for me at least, impossible to learn. And I don't think I'm alone in that. A lot of people's most hated subject is statistics in college. And so I guess
I had it at 8 a.m. That didn't help.
I see.
Okay, so I came to know you through your work with Researchers.One. And what Researchers.One is an interdisciplinary platform for scholars to publish their academic research. One of the interesting things about the site is that it circumvents the peer review process. If a scholar had a new work of research that it wanted to add to the site's library of research, they could put it up this afternoon and it would be available for other people to read and comment on. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about why you guys started Researchers.One. There's specifically, I'm interested in your thoughts on peer review and the sort of legacy system of scholarly publishing. Tell us about the problems that you saw in those contexts that sort of gave rise to this idea.
So before we started Researchers.One, I mean, we were me and Ryan Martin were each both statisticians. So we have a pretty narrow circle of people in academia that we are engaging with. But a common theme, first of all, it was a common theme that everybody just complains about peer review endlessly. That, you know, they got their paper rejected. This guy's an idiot. You know, all kinds of things. And it came to a point, and we were having similar, you know, we submit our papers, we get back, and you kind of go through it enough to where you either say, well, I'm either going to continue to complain for the rest of my life, or I'm going to suck it up, or I'm going to do something that I think improves upon the thing that I'm complaining about. And so we took that third road, and that's where Researchers.One came out of. And when you decide to go that route, I mean, there's different directions you can take as well. I think the most common, say 99% direction, is to write a bunch of articles about how messed up peer review is in the same peer reviewed journal. Well, it's not really your approach. In the same journals that you're complaining about, right? And to have committee discussions and to, you know, have panels and to talk about it, basically, and to not to actually do anything about it. And so we thought, well, let's actually try to do something about it that will address the issue. Well, that opens up a question unto itself, because you have to define the issue clearly enough to know what you're trying to actually fix and actually have a plan for fixing it. So what Researchers.One is, and this is after, you know, this took a while to figure out what we wanted it to be, and it's still evolving as we learn new things, is, like you said, it's a platform. It's really meant to be a decentralized hub for researchers to publish research, to interact with each other, to engage with one another. And so it initially began as a place to publish just articles kind of on a one-off basis. If I have an article, I can publish there. If you have an article, you can publish it there. No disciplinary boundaries, no gatekeeping. But the catch there was there's still it's still a peer-reviewed journal, or peer-reviewed outlet. I shouldn't call it a journal. Because every article is subject to public open review by anyone in the world. So if I have a comment on your article, or if somebody who knows something about what you wrote and wants to say something about it, they can go on and they can talk about it, and they can inform everybody who comes to the site that there's something wrong with it, or something right about it, or whatever they want to say, which is very different. And that's, well, one to say is that's in our view the true kind of scholarly meaning of peer review, which is you did something that you worked hard on that you think is correct, I give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not, that you think what you did is correct. And I might have a different viewpoint professionally, because I have read something different, or I had a different interpretation than you did. And I can express that to you, and you can choose to integrate it into your work, or you could choose to completely ignore it. That's your choice, because it's your work at the end of the day. And so there's a scholarly component to peer review that is essential, as opposed to what peer review actually is now, or the primary purpose of peer review, which is an administrative bureaucratic role, which is not, hey, let me share with you valuable information that I know that maybe you don't know, but rather, your papers, here's all the things you did wrong, or I'm going to hold you hostage because I don't like what your conclusions are, or because of any number of social, political, or other reasons that come into play. Because at the end of the day, really what most researchers, unfortunately, you get into the game, most researchers care about getting published in a journal so that they can list it on their CV so that they can get promoted. Most people are not reading the articles, so they see the journal on the CV, they say that's a good journal, they don't know what's in the paper. So it becomes a game. It has become a game. And so we were trying to extract ourselves out of that game more than anything else. I didn't even necessarily care who else uses the site. We wanted to create something that we would use, right? So at minimum, we know that we'll use it, and we know that this is what we want it to be. And we also figured, if we're having these thoughts, if these are things that bother us, there's probably other people out there that are thinking the same thing.
So I want to talk about some of the limitations of the traditional peer review process. And you kind of alluded to some of them, but some of our listeners might not be exactly familiar with how this process works. And it's worth explaining. If I write an article, I spend months producing a new work of research and send it out to a journal. Sometimes it'll take 6 months before they get back to me and say, yeah, we'll take it, or no, we won't. And most of the time, they'll get back to you and say, maybe we want to take this. We don't know. We want you to do this, 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 and this, right? So you spend months doing this, 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 and that. Then you send it back to them, and they take another 5 or 6 months for peer reviewers to look it over. So now you're in over a year deep, if you consider the time you spent producing the research. And then they may come back and say, yeah, this is good, we'll publish it. In that event, you might still wait a year or more before it actually appears in print, right? It's also possible that they just say, no, we just don't think it's for us. And then you've got to start the process from square one again. And so it could take years for this to happen. One of the things that I like a lot about Researchers.One is it collapses the time. Sometimes I wonder about how much time and energy is spent satisfying this or that reviewer in order to get something published, and how much of that time could be used to generating more research, not just an article that makes this peer reviewer happy. Have you ever had one of these reviews? I wonder if it happens in statistics, but it happens. It's common in the humanities, where a peer reviewer says, yeah, this is pretty good, but you made no mention of this person's work, and you just can't not mention it. So you need to do this or that. Does that happen in stats?
Oh, no, absolutely. That happens. I mean, I've had worse happen. I don't know if I was officially banned, but I was threatened to be banned from the Royal Statistical Society journals, because
I
they're
want to hear about that. What happened
well,
there?
there's what happened ultimately, I think, is that I published a paper that before I published work that they wanted one of their friends to publish first. And so they decided that I couldn't publish in their journal. And when I raised the issue, they threatened to just ban me from ever publishing there again, which is perfectly fine with me. But they didn't carry through that. They didn't carry through with their threat. But so yes, this type of thing happens because at the end of the day, I think that, of course, some research is more politically charged than others, and your field much more so than mine. But there's still, it's still just people, and people are just, unfortunately, the way that that at least me and Ryan in our work, in our thinking about it, we don't think people come into the system corrupt. I mean, at least I don't think the vast majority of people I went to school with, I mean, your field might be different actually, but at least in especially in math or sciences, people come in because they have a genuine interest in the subject, because that's really all there is. I mean, you go through school, you're learning math. It doesn't, at least that's not when I was a kid. Now it might be different, but eventually, the system is what corrupts people. It seemingly. But to the thing that you're bringing up here is, first of all, do people hold papers hostage? Yes. Do they reject papers for petty reasons? Yes. Will they find any number of excuses to reject a paper because it competes with them, or because it's in a competing group that isn't affiliated to their graduate students? Yes, these things all happen. And so again, it gets back to what were we trying to do when we created this was, it gets to the question, what are we trying to do here? What exactly is the point of all of this? Why would you wait 3, 4, 5 years for your work to be published? Why would you care so much about or why should you care about what an anonymous person thinks you should put in your paper? Why should, and these are all questions that are worth it. And maybe the answer is you should care for XYZ reasons, but in a lot of the cases we determine, and I believe, well, you shouldn't care. Quite honestly, you just should not care. And since you shouldn't care, the system should not be set up in a way that forces you to act like you care. And
right.
So
if I don't want to cite scholar X, or if I didn't, it's because I didn't want to, and that's not a problem, right?
yes. And also, I mean, the thing that people seem very afraid of is that bad research will get published. And there's a few things we can discuss in that. One is that bad research is almost is actually the vast majority of the literature. So it's not working. But also, why should I care? Why should I stop you from writing a bad paper? Why do I care how you spend your time and what you put your name to? I mean, I can try to help you out. I can try to say, I think this, I think that, genuinely trying to, but at the end of the day, if you say, no, in the interest of you thinking this is what's best, I disagree what you think is good, I'm going my way, then you have the consequences for that, or you reap the rewards of that. And an anonymous person, why should I as an anonymous person care? I don't share in the benefits, and I also importantly don't share in the in the grief or in the criticism when you write something because I told you to, and it turns out to be wrong, or it turns out to be stupid.
So this is my where I kind of gave up on the peer review process as it exists. Is what you said, is it markets itself as kind of a quality insurance mechanism, but you look at the fields of sociology, psychology, and their replication crisis. We're learning that, in fact, all sorts of public or published research cannot be scientifically replicated, and therefore is arguably untrue. In my field and in the humanities, essentially 90% of the scholarship gets published as just straight up political advocacy or activism, masquerading as kind of analysis and analytic work. So I wanted to share, because you talked about your experience with a threatened ban. What happened to me recently is I started getting a lot of desk rejections. When I send a manuscript out, right, the editor will just say, yeah, sorry, I don't think it's a good fit. I'm not going to send it out for peer review. And my response will be, well, like, isn't that the function of peer review, is to see if other people think it's a good fit? No, blah, blah. And the flagship journal of my field, Rhetoric Society Quarterly, the editor actually got back to me when I pressed her on the reason for the desk rejection. And she said that she didn't want to publish anything associated with anyone who has a whiff of transphobia attached to them. I had discussed transgenderism in my book. The article that I submitted had absolutely nothing to do with questions of transgender identity. But never, I honestly, I appreciated the fact that she was willing to just say, yeah, I'm just not sending it out for peer review because I don't want to publish stuff from you.
Right.
But it surprised me that then I went to Taylor and Francis, who owns God knows how many academic journals and publishes them. And I thought that they'd be really interested to see this. Right. I sent them the emails, all the documentation. I was shocked to learn that they're like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, have, are desk rejections common in statistics? I when I was a younger scholar, I never got them. Now I get them all the time. I mean, maybe I'm in imagining dark motives here, but I don't think so.
I'm trying to think. I don't think I've ever had one. And in a way, you could argue that that's not good either, because it wastes a lot of time. Actually, as I sit here and talk, I completely forgot about this. What year is it now? Oh, so I've had a paper under peer review since 2015
What?
that I still haven't gotten back the first round of reviews for. So I forgot it existed, actually. So anyway, that stuff happens.
I've had journals refuse to acknowledge that they received a submission from me.
Mhm. No.
I guess that's like the best way to censor is just pretend you never got it.
Right, yeah. So I don't know how often it actually happens. I mean, as far as the peer review process is concerned, me and Ryan have written things on the site of, we originally wrote kind of a manifesto of sorts of what our original motivations were. But, one of the realities of it is that we have had a very good time, a very easy and a good time of it, all things considered. Of course, I've had a lot of papers rejected. And when you're young, these things hurt more than when you're older, and you get more kind of excited about it. But all in all, I was able to publish in, the top journals in my field. I don't think that I was being, except for the one situation I mentioned, there was nobody had an axe to grind with me, at least up until that point. And so that those weren't issues. Those weren't issues that we had to deal with. Now in statistics, has this changed? I mean, because once we started Researchers.One, which was around 2018, now I just publish all my work there. So I don't actually submit to journals in my field. So I haven't been rejected in a while, but I haven't done anything in that realm for a while. But what you mentioned about your desk rejection based on you think about it, on your, whether it's your identity or actually on someone's perception of who you are, which the article itself wasn't about the topic. Even if the article was about the topic, I don't know if it fits within the scope of the field or not, doesn't mean that it's automatically disqualified. But this stuff happens in science as well, because in statistics a couple of years ago. So one of the founding fathers, the founding father of statistics, R.A. Fisher, and he also founded genetics, as it turns out. So he was pretty much a big deal in the early 20th century. And was one of probably the best scientists of his time. So there was the biggest award, or one of the bigger awards in statistics, is kind of a lifetime achievement award, was to give what's called the R.A. Fisher Lecture. But I guess Fisher effectively got canceled and his name was taken off the lecture because there was some association to him that he was a racist, which actually all of the history and all of the firsthand accounts it was complete opposite, in fact. But the convenient narrative was that he was a racist, and so they took him off of the lecture. So in the end, is that a huge deal? I mean, it is a big deal. It's a small deal because, in the sense that I don't actually really care whose name goes on a lecture, if the lecture even exists, on the one hand. But once the lecture does exist, if we're going to change it, the reason for the change could be we don't have enough money to fund it. Change could be we just don't feel like showing up to this lecture anymore. but the reason matters. And this particular reason is just a completely, well, it's a made up reason, but also it doesn't, it gets to this problem that there's a person, and then there's all of the things they did that is extremely important and everybody is still using to this day. And all of modern statistics is pretty much based on. Who cares about the person? The stuff that, are we celebrating the person or his accomplishments? Or what he says or what his science is? And that's something that's been completely lost, and is continuing to get eroded as we go on.
I wanted to pick your brain a little bit too, just on the features of print scholarly publication. I wonder, it's getting increasingly costly to publish print journals and this sort of thing. The infrastructure exists, like Researchers.One, to render them obsolete, at least in theory. I also think that because of the print nature of the journal, it artificially limits the length of scholarly work, right? The vast majority of journals are going to say, no, you can't write more than 10,000 words. Why? Right? There's also only space in each issue for them to publish so many articles. And so I often think about like the way that the nature of print scholarly publication actually puts artificial limits on the amount of scholarship that can be released and on what the scholarship that does get released can do. And with the increasing costs and with the ongoing sort of digital revolution, I wonder, do you think, 20 years from now, will the old legacy print system of scholarly publication exist to the extent that it does now?
Well, I think that I don't know how it is in your field, but I mean, this has already pretty much happened in statistics, and in a lot of I think a lot in math and probably other fields like that. They do still, certain societies, certain journals do release paper copies, but very few people actually read them. Very few people subscribe to them. Everything's accessible online, and a lot of journals that are coming into existence are just going 100% online. The only reason not to do that would be this sense that having a physical copy of a journal is somehow prestigious or what. I mean, there is still a mindset out there actually, let me answer your question first, but which is, yes, I do think that the paper journals will go away. I mean, in fact, I'm not sure, but I think most of the journals which Rutgers subscribes to don't even exist in print. They don't buy them in print, or they don't take the print copies. They just make them accessible online, which is realistically much more convenient for most people anyway.
So, man, the question just slipped my mind that I was going to ask you, but it was.
Well, what I will say though, so I mean, maybe while you think of your question, but there are still journals that come out, and I've talked to people because we work with Researchers.One. We do not only, in addition to publishing individual articles, we also host journals, and we have a bunch of journals that are jumping on board and want to be hosted by us, not just because they want to start a journal and they could start it anywhere, but they choose us because they agree with the principles that underlie our philosophy and our whole site. We've also run some conferences on the site, but in dealing with some of these journals, there is a mindset that is hard to shake, which is, a lot of people come to us, they say, yes, we want to do something different. There's something wrong with peer review. We want to work with you. And then there tends to be kind of a lull where they kind of go away, and it's unclear whether they're going to do it. They're going to pull the trigger. They might go and do it the more traditional way. And there's this tension, which is that especially for those who have made it further into the careers within the current, or what used to be of the paradigm, and now it's kind of changing, but this is kind of ingrained in them to do things a certain way. And the idea in one particular case was that having a print version of a journal meant something really important. And And ultimately, I don't care, go ahead and do it, but that's not something that we do. So we don't provide that service. Yeah.
You mentioned that nobody reads the print journals anymore, and sometimes I wonder if this has created a different sort of scholar. I think that a professor who was 30 or 40 years our senior, the way that you did research is you got your quarterly copy of this hard journal and you read the issue, right? And I think that what that gave a lot of scholars back then was a very good 35,000-foot view of the discipline, and what's going on. I don't know about you, but like I never pick up an issue of a journal in my field, at least not since grad school, and just read it cover to cover, right? Instead, what I do is I have my very narrow little areas of interest within rhetoric, and I search databases for particular articles that address my narrow interests. And so I think I have probably a deeper knowledge of very narrow issues than a scholar 30 years ago would have had, but a much shallower knowledge of the broader concerns of the discipline as a whole. You think that we just people say under 50 are different scholars fundamentally than people used to be?
That's probably true. I mean, there's a good reason not to read every article in a given journal, which is that most of it's almost entirely junk. I don't know, speak for your field.
No, mine
But
does too.
so it is kind of, and you try it, you do it when you're a graduate student, and you quickly realize I mean, as a graduate student, you probably can't really discern as easily what's good and what's bad, but eventually you figure out, yeah, what am I doing here? So that's a lot of time invested for no real payoff. But so I mean, but to your point, that's a good point. And also it underscores that the fact that journals themselves, it underscores why specific journals and prestigious journals and quote unquote high impact journals actually used to in a print actually have a meaning or have a purpose. Because if I didn't subscribe to the journal you just published in, I didn't read your article. And if I do subscribe to it, and the more likely I'm going to subscribe to the top journals in the field, that's why I saw the articles. So that's why you want to get into those articles. So, or into those journals. So, that's something that is a vestige of, really, it's a technological. I mean, it's just technology. The technology that we used to be working on was basically a printing press, and you write on and you put it on paper and you mail it out. And now we have a different technology, and that changes how people consume and how people do research. But yeah, so good point. And I guess one thing that comes out of that question is that in a lot of ways, to what extent does this peer-reviewed journal thing, where there is a finite resource of number of pages that you want to print, and therefore the need to pick what goes in there, that plays in, you could make a case that there's a legitimate role of peer review in that we have a finite resource, and therefore we have to allot that resources appropriately. That argument doesn't really fly anymore.
Yeah. Well, I want to transition to talking about sort of the university more generally. And I think that both you and I, and basically everybody I've had on this program so far, agree that the university is in crisis, and that ideology and sort of political activism have a lot to do with this and have corrupted some of the traditions and values of university life. I ask everybody, how did this happen, and how did it happen so fast? Do you have ideas about that?
So that I don't know. I mean, so that in some way I can't, put a pinpoint it. But I guess what I would want to think about, I guess the question is, what I would ask is what just happened? Exactly. I don't even know what to say. How did this happen? Because I can't really wrap my head around what.
Okay. What do you think happened?
Well, no, what I mean is, I'm not trying to say that I don't understand what you're asking. It's kind of, when you think of it, so the universities by and large, and I would, probably we'll say 90+% of them or more, have been overtaken by political interest, as you said. This has now infested itself into every aspect of almost every aspect of academic or intellectual life, all the way down to not just to, what the policies of the university are with respect to discipline and behavior, but into the fields of study, the research, what is and isn't allowed to get published in a scholarly way, what you are and aren't allowed to comment on as an expert in a field that has a legitimate kind of background and experience to comment on such things. So really, I mean, what has happened, I guess, is, academia has always had I don't know about, I shouldn't say always, but for a long time has had a liberal slant. And it was kind of understood that, it was kind of well understood, but still you could, to some extent, still reason with people or have certain conversations with certain people. As time has gone on, that ability has completely gone away. And what I think has actually happened is that, whereas this is feel free to disagree with this or to kind of fill in some gaps. This is just from what I'm looking at. The university was this kind of bastion of liberalism, but now that's actually, the university is actually just like everywhere else now. I mean, things have actually spread so far into society. It's not just that it's somebody teaching philosophy or English who has a certain, political stance. These are things that have become woven into society and government and everything that, all aspects of life.
So a lot of people for a long time thought that these trends would be isolated to the humanities and the social sciences, but it seems like there's a lot of science recently that it's also moving into science and mathematics, which people had thought would be protected from the woke ideologues. Do you see any evidence of that encroachment in stats?
So what I would say, so in terms of, so I think that you have to look a lot harder and kind of know a lot more to detect it, because it, for the most part, at the end of the day, 99% of research or more in statistics is not something that can be woke, right? I mean, I can't imagine how I could make my probability papers woke or not woke, right? Somebody will figure out a way, I'm sure.
Well, you've heard of people, right, in the news who are saying that advanced math is racist, this kind of thing.
Yeah, so those things, of course. I'm just trying to think. Actually, I think, are you asking actually in the field, the people who are
Yeah.
practicing? So yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to answer, is that the content itself is still hard to finagle in most cases. Although, when you get into more applied or areas where you're applying causal inference to policing and to school admissions, without question, and climate change, all those things. I mean, without, certain interests are definitely coming into play there. But where it actually finds itself mostly, and I consider this so petty that I don't even pay attention to it, but it's really the social environment, social aspect of it. Who gets hired, who gets awards, and that matters in the long run. So I shouldn't dismiss it, but it hasn't worked itself to the point where and it also degrades the quality of work, because it promotes work that's lower quality than others. But that's kind of a much more, I would say, a much less kind of in your face way of doing it than it seems to be in a lot of the humanities or in other fields.
So in the English department, I mean, part of what it means to be an English professor in good standing is to consistently signal your support and unequivocal adherence to a sort of left-wing social agenda. And this is even like outside class, right? Interacting with colleagues, this has to be signaled too. And obviously you don't have to, but if you don't, there's certain consequences for not doing so. And I wonder, generally, so statistics professors as a group, if people are, at a dinner party, I assume you guys aren't talking stats, at least not like mathematical problems and things, I assume you're talking about the same thing that English professors talk about, which is the world, the university, the society, personal lives. And in those contexts, political concerns come up. Do you see sort of a uniformity of ideological commitment just in the professors outside of the classroom, in informal contexts?
I think here's how I would summarize or answer the question, which is, and this doesn't sound like it's available to you, but it is possible to avoid certain dinner parties. It is possible to avoid certain groups and still socialize with other people. So in other words, it's not so uniform necessarily. Where everybody is so far gone that the way that you describe. Certainly many are, but they can be avoided.
The best way to avoid it is to not get invited.
No, I've been good at that.
So can the university be saved? Is there a way to claw it back from whatever's happened? And I agree that your question of what happened rather than how it happened is a good one, because I'm sure there would be some disagreement on that question. But taking for granted that we understand what happened, and that it's bad, can we get it back to where it was, or is that a futile task?
Right. So I think this depends. It depends on what you mean by clawing back. We'll get to. I don't know if we want to go down. What would we be restoring exactly? What would we be repairing? Okay, those are the first questions. And is it something that's worth restoring? Those are separate questions. But can it be done? I think over 100-year period, anything's possible, right? But if I would say over the next 5 to 10 or even 20 years, no, I don't think anything's going to change. That's kind of my assessment of it, because it probably took. I mean, when you think about it, it's kind of remarkable, and I have to kind of look back and say, wow, that was a pretty pretty long play. That a lot of this stuff started. I don't know the scholarship, but 30, 40 years ago, it sounds like, maybe longer. With some of the critical theories. Mm-hmm. And so the way this is my statistical analysis of it without having data, is if it took something 50 years to come into play, and if it got in, then it's at least another 50 years before it gets out, just because it took, basically it's been woven into the fabric for that long. Then how are you going to, that's kind of just a rule of thumb that I'm applying. Doesn't mean I'm right, but so that's how I would think about it. No, I don't think it's going away anytime soon, and I don't think, though, that maybe I'm wrong about this, but it doesn't seem like there's that much will or desire to make it go away from the inside, right? And so I think that this is where we're asking the question: what would we be repairing exactly? What are we trying to restore? And I think that you would get very different answers to that. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's not necessarily clear what you're restoring, because the thing you're going back to might be a lot better than where we're at now. But you might say, well, actually, if I had to sign up for that, I'd rather not either. And so how far are you trying to go back exactly? And then you end up to a place where universities barely existed, or they never existed in the form that ideally in our head we think, well, it must have been better, it must have been just like we dreamed of when we went to graduate school, and it probably never was. And there's also a sense, and this is where to tie it back to Researchers.One, because when you think about the journal system, which is a small part of academia, very small part of academia, and when we were thinking about when you think about, okay, there's a lot of things wrong with it. Okay, then what do? You can say, well, can we fix it? And a lot of people go the route of fixing it. We didn't go, we're not, but just to be clear, we're not trying to fix it. We're just saying this is something different. We think it's beyond fixing, number one. And we also don't think it deserves to be fixed. And I think that I think universities have actually gotten to that point. And I think that they don't deserve to be fixed. They want what they have, and I think it deserves the, the benefit, whether there's benefits, whether it's the good or the bad, whatever it comes of it, is what it deserves. And I think it should be, I think I think we should allow it to go by the wayside, and I think it will go by the wayside for a segment of, once it goes by the wayside though, for a segment of people, it doesn't have to be 50% of people, for 20-30% of people, it erodes its credibility, 95, 90 or 95%, because what made the university what it is that it was the one kind of accepted place where, it was kind of where truth came out of, or at least, doesn't mean everything they say is true, but if it came out of there, it was well thought out. It was the best that it could possibly be, in whatever field. And I think it's pretty clear that that's not the case anymore, and that and a lot of people understand that. And as things continue to erode, where people aren't interested in going to college anymore for these reasons, they're finding alternative avenues. The value that college is supposed to provide is obviously just not there. Then it continues to erode what it is that you, when you say, can we restore it? What it is you think you're restoring is not, there's not going to be anything to restore at that point. Yeah, it's
That's
kind of
a really good answer. When I think about things I have in mind of restoring, it's standards, it's a space where open discourse, dialogue can actually happen again, those sorts of things. But I agree with you. It, in some senses, it doesn't deserve to be restored. This is something I think about, is the system so hollowed out now that at some point in, say, the next 50 years, it collapses under its own weight. It sounds like what you're saying is these things might happen, but you and I probably won't see them in our professional lives.
Well, that's because maybe our professional lives might be like another year and a half, but that maybe wasn't what you meant there.
I mean, if we go to the ripe old age of 75 and take emeritus, that things in all probability will be what they are now and not much different.
Yeah, I mean, they might be very different, but if I had to predict that they're different in the opposite direction of maybe what you're suggesting. Things do tend to kind of have a way of coming
change.
back.
It's just going to be even worse. Is that what you're saying?
That's what that would be my at least I'd put my money on that one. Although things do have a way of there is a boomerang effect, but I think that that's more likely to come from outside and just kind of. Yeah, I don't know what it's going to be. I can't predict what it's going to be, but I just think that, there's a quicker, it's just like, we no longer need print journals anymore. I mean, that's a very narrow, small thing, but do we really, there's going to be a point, and it's quickly becoming apparent that we don't really need. It gets back to maybe the questions that we ask, when we're talking about peer review. What is it we're trying to do? With a university, what is it that we're trying to do here? What is the purpose that it's supposed to serve?
And
We know that it doesn't
4,000 of them.
We know that it doesn't serve that purpose, right? But what is the purpose in the first place? And then it becomes apparent, I think, that for the most part, they don't really, they're not even close to serving that purpose. I think for most people, just to put it in, be a little more concrete, for most people, you go to college to get a job or to meet people and to do, and apparently now that's not really what colleges help you to do.
All right, one more question. You are a dude who studies probability, and you are a gambler. If you're 18 years old in the United States today, and essentially going to college is a risk, you have to lay down some money, presumably, to see if you get the gain out of it that you want to happen. Is that a bet you take if you're 18 years old in 2022, or do you lay your money somewhere else?
So that's a very good question. So if the people who are the people who are in the hardest position of all are the people, is who you just said, the 18-year-old today, because I kind of feel like today you don't really have good options because there's no alternative. So I think if you're 18 years old 10 or 15 or 20 years from now, that answer will be much easier, and you can easily forgo college for something else. Today, I mean, I think it's probably a case by case basis, because I still think that there's probably, on the whole, there is still benefits to going to college for a lot of people. I mean, going to Harvard, ignoring what Harvard is, meeting the people who are there. I mean, that's still the best place to go to kind of get that exposure. And ultimately, that's where the value comes in, right? And so it's unfortunate, but I think that is there. Today, you're really stuck, but I still think that it's on the side of better than not. If you can go to the better schools, to the lesser schools, you could, and by lesser schools, I just mean really at the end of the day, the educate. I don't believe that it's about the education. I think that now, especially, you can learn whatever you want pretty much anywhere. Obviously, the quality of the education is actually not very good, depending on the fields, because it's tainted by the things that you're talking about. But it's really the access to the networks, and it's the social element of it. And so that still is the place to go. And I think that over time that'll change, and my answer would change over time accordingly.
And it's sad, but you're right that it is the connections and the network that is the object of value, and arguably just the credential, the thing that comes at the end, rather than sort of the study itself. But I think these are all signs of just how hollowed out it is.
Yeah, but I will say, on the credential side, and this gets to the network, I mean, everything is eroding, deteriorating, because as the standards, I mean, there used to be a reason why you put Harvard next to your name. It meant something because there was a standard to get in. I mean, of course, a lot of the standard, there was a lot of legacy and a lot of that, although that indicates something as well, something different. But now it indicates a lot of other things, and I think that erodes the value from a quality perspective considerably.
Harry Crane, co-founder of Researchers.One. If you've got essays laying around that you're tired of waiting on peer reviewers for, go ahead and publish there. There's some good eyes looking there. Also, full professor of statistics at Rutgers University. Harry, thank you so much for talking with me today. Lots of interesting stuff.
Thanks a lot.